You're listening to the Classic Gamers Guild podcast.
This makes my nipples hard.
Hey there, and welcome to the podcast. Joining us this week is Daniel Albu, a fellow member of the adventure game Hotspot. Daniel has carved a unique niche for himself in the gaming industry, not just as a developer, but also as a curator of gaming history. And on this episode, we're digging into a discussion about The Dig, a game that stands as a unique gem in the LucasArts catalog, celebrated for its depth of narrative and sweet, pixelated goodness.
Wow, that's quite an intro.
Right? I don't appreciate these little puns you keep slipping into the intro. Daniel, thank you for coming on, man. How are you? I mean, we know how you are because we just were talking for quite some time. But to the audience, you just stepped into the room, and we're all like, Daniel, what's my dude? How you doing?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, and second, how am I doing? Doing fine.
Very good. I know. I feel like that's such an obligatory question. It's like everybody's going to say they're fine, regardless of personal tragedies or whatever might be going on. But we got to say it. It's just like, if we don't say how you doing and hear that I'm fine, then we sound cold. So I'm glad we're all fine. We're all surface fine.
Surface fine, but we might dig into all of it during this episode. I had to reuse it. You left it open.
Yeah.
I know, man. It's just exhausting.
Get all the dig puns out of the way.
That's right. Actually, okay, so we are here to talk about The Dig, which is a game that I personally had experience with when I was younger through the LucasArts Archive Volume 3, and I never finished it. I got stuck in the beginning, and I don't know why. Having played through it again for this episode, I don't know why I got stuck in the beginning. All I had to do was pick up the comm about the pig and talk to the girl, and she sends it out, and the game goes on. But when I was a teenager, it didn't catch with me. But I am super curious to hear, when did you first play this game or even hear of it, Daniel?
Wow. When you say that you were stuck at the beginning, you meant the actual beginning of the game. It's like the third action in the game.
For real. I don't know. I think it's because I just finished playing Monkey Island and I was like, oh, this should be just like that. And it was such a different tone. And I don't know, I passed it by, and I'm disappointed I did that because it really is a beautiful game.
First of all, we have to talk about the different tone. People keep saying that The Dig has a different tone, but I don't agree with that notion, because even though it's not haha funny like Monkey Island, it is sarcastic in a way.
It is very wry. Yeah, I agree. I was just saying that to Paul. I said it is still funny. It's just a different kind of funny. Did you play it when you were a teenager or when you were older? When did you come across this game?
I played it in spring 1996, and when I was a teenager, and I finished it in a week without any help, without any walkthroughs. Didn't have any at the time. And I think that out of all of the LucasArts adventure games, this and Loom are the only two adventure games, apart from the fact that they're two of my favorite adventure games. They're the only two that I completed in a week without a walkthrough. The other ones that I finished without a walkthrough took me a lot more than that. But these two, that's why I don't understand when people say that the puzzles are difficult or obtuse. I think it's a pretty short and easy game.
That is interesting, because Loom completely makes sense as far as being able to complete it in a week without a walkthrough. I mean, it's still impressive, but I could get behind that. But this game, I guess I could get on board with it if it wasn't for the claw machine puzzle.
That was really tricky to figure out the lights and which way for it, because you had to catalog what each one did first, and then to clue in you have to do them in a row. It took me forever.
Yeah, Danny, how did you get through that puzzle, if you recall, like the first time? And also, I didn't explain it well by saying claw machine puzzle, but where you programmed the robot to pick up the lens.
So a lot of the times, I use the same method on my live streams in games that I haven't played yet. I brute force my way out of things. So with this particular one, you can just try various combinations to see how the claw moves and then figure out what you need to do. the main problem with that particular puzzle is the fact that you don't see the end of the claw because it's pretty pixelated, so you don't understand where the end of the claw is supposed to be placed in order for the claw to pick up the thing. But other than that, it's a pretty straightforward puzzle, Paul.
Right. I guess that's fair. I guess it is if you approach it somewhat methodically, where you're actually tracking what didn't work, in other words, and that's where my lack of order kind of usually bites me in the butt when it comes to precision. I'm not good with precision-based puzzles, I guess. But that is, I think, by far the hardest puzzle in the game. Is that a stretch? Would you agree to that, Daniel? The hardest?
I don't think it's the hardest one. People tend to remember the turtle puzzle as the hardest one in the game. Sorry.
Right, that's
so
fair.
The thing is with turtle puzzle was the fact that they realized that it was too difficult through playtesting, and so they added the fossil in the lagoon over there, and people don't seem to notice that there is a fossil. But if you look at the fossil, apart from the fact that it looks out of place because they had to hire a different artist to work on the fossil because they added it like pretty late into production. People don't notice the fossil, which has the solution of the turtle puzzle.
Right, so it's just a matter of noticing. Yeah, as long as you just notice that one. Yeah, because I don't remember that one being difficult, so I must have been able to spot that. Okay, well, hold on. Let me back us up. So, okay, my experience with the game, real quick, is I played it for the first time about 5 years ago. And then Anna, you I guess you had already covered that. You played it when you played like, I don't know, 20 minutes of it when you were a kid, and then just,
not enough.
And then just this week got it finished. Okay, so that catches up. That's our little origin stories with it. Let's kind of go through the game based on like a timeline of events of the game's story, let's say, and I hopefully I want to kind of stop as we go along and just get Daniel, get all the anecdotes that you have behind development and things like that, because you've maybe a good thing to get out of the way now is how many people that were involved in development for the Dig have you interviewed?
Wow. First of all, I interviewed out of the project leads, I interviewed Noah Falstein and Dave Grossman, which are the first and the third project leads. And out of the people who actually worked on the game, quite a lot. The composer, Michael Land. I interviewed, for example, Anson Ju, who was an animator on the previous versions. And so a lot of the things that he's worked on didn't make it into the game and are just there as relics of the past. And actually there's a credit in the credit sequence that's called Ghosts of Dig's Past.
Yeah.
And people are credited there, people who worked on the previous iterations of the Dig.
I heard it was a lot gorier in some of the iterations. I think the goriest part in the whole thing was, for later when you have to do some work with the guy's hand to help him out. But this particular version is not particularly gory.
What's interesting about the gore, and Daniel, maybe you can confirm this because I'm not sure of the validity of it, but I had heard that some of the backlash from Jurassic Park actually caused Steven Spielberg to request that some of the gorier scenes, which apparently he was responsible for in the Dig, to be removed, which is interesting.
Exactly.
Okay, very cool. Because that's kind of neat to think that Jurassic Park had a kind of direct, maybe indirect effect on the game.
Well, it's just like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom caused the movie association to create the PG-13 rating. Right.
Yeah, very cool. Okay. I'm trying to think now of like framing wise, because if we're going to go through the story of the game, I'm not sure how to fit the various stages of development into that. So maybe we should cover that now. Okay, so I'll ask you, Daniel, what did you get a story from Dave Grossman? Because when I was going through the brief history of the game, I was surprised at how short of a time he was involved in it, and I'm kind of curious why he left so quickly.
Yeah, in my conversation with Dave Grossman, he told me that he worked on it for like a month or even less, and the reason why he left so quickly was because he didn't want to work on a game that's that serious. He preferred the more whimsical games.
Right.
Even though, as we said at the beginning of this conversation, the game is not that serious.
No, it's not. And to your point, Daniel, it definitely maintains, I think, a kind of that staple LucasArts quippy sarcasm throughout. Like it feels pretty on brand to me. It's maybe like the overarching theme is more serious, but I agree with you. I think that the contents of the actual dialogue are pretty playful, are pretty on brand for Lucas. Yeah, it's not like jarringly serious or anything like that. Which you're right, and it could definitely. If you were to go on reviews alone, you might pick up that sense, but that's definitely not the case. It's pretty playful and fun. Okay, so Brian Moriarty, I didn't know until researching for this episode that he was involved, but it was one of those deals where as soon as I heard that he was a lead for quite some time on the game, it just immediately made sense because there's a Loom-like vibe to the game, I guess, with the crystals and just the fantasy. That's the word I'm struggling for. Yeah, there's like a fantasy level that feels pretty on brand for Brian. And also for you to confirm, and was Brian apparently... Okay, so to our listeners, LucasArts had, I guess, what they called like a pizza orgy, where they would have everybody come in, eat tons of pizza, and play test the games, and in return they had to give feedback. And Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that Brian left or quit the project that day, the day of right after the pizza orgy. He's like, I'm out.
Well, I don't have the exact dates because I'm still waiting for him to reply to my emails to join me for a conversation, but I do know that he worked quite a lot on the game, and some of his elements made it into the final game. That's why he gets writing credit, unlike the other people who are listed in the Ghosts of Dick's Past.
Right.
But Brian Moriarty seemed to have problems with working in a team, and so that's why things worked better in Loom in a much smaller team, but not in the Dig.
Right. It seems, I don't know, the Dig. There, okay, on one hand, there's an element of what would you say, like quilted, stitched together in a sense. Like I guess what I'm saying is the first time I played it, I did get a small sense of maybe development problems, or that it had switched hands, let's say. But once I realized just on the surface level of how many problems they had and how many leads were changed, it's actually a pretty cohesive game. It doesn't reflect quite the amount of turmoil that it went through in development. Is that fair?
I agree. Yeah. The thing is that every time they started the project anew, they started from scratch and they try to keep some elements, but most of the time they just started from scratch. So there are some backgrounds that remained from the beginning of the production of the game, and there are themes that stick all the way through. But the main reason why it seems like they started production a lot earlier than the usual LucasArts games. For example, you could see that LucasArts game that was released in 1993, you'd know that they started production in 1992 or 1991. So the graphic interface and the overall experience seemed like something in line with things that were released in that particular year. But with the Dig, when you have Full Throttle that was released in April 1995 and had larger sprites and cinematic scenes, they didn't add the same things in the Dig because the Dig started production a lot earlier. So the interface, if you notice, the interface has a lower resolution than Full Throttle. The sprites are really small, and the way they had to, make the game seem a lot more impressive was with the cutscenes. But the cutscenes don't seem like they're in the same graphical language as the interactive scenes, because you have low res interface with low res adventure gamey things, while cutscenes that are full screen and animated, unlike things that were very in line with things that were released that year.
Right. Yeah, because it's the game was made in 3 engines, or I guess 2 for the visual, right? The Scum and the Insane, which I hadn't learned about till I started researching an interactive streaming animation engine. Now, didn't Bill Tiller? I know you had an awesome interview with him. I was re-listening to some of that, and he was saying so he kind of stuck with the whole project, I guess, all the way through.
Well, he's credited as the lead designer on the final version. And he did stick around for some of the previous versions.
He was one of the people that seems to have kind of been there all the way through, doing whatever it is that he does to make it happen.
I think he joined in the second iteration, if I'm not mistaken.
That makes sense.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because with Na Falstein's The Dig, the game was quite different. The game had RPG elements and things that didn't make it into the final game. But the second iteration, which is Brian Moriarty's iteration, has a lot more elements that made it into the final game.
Go ahead. Was there any way to play any of the original? Because I've seen quite a lot of screen grabs or footage, I guess you could say, of the early iterations. Was there any playable demos like floating around online from the early versions?
So I keep asking this question the various guests that come on my show, and there wasn't any. Even though there was a Pizza Orgy, which is supposed to be around the playable demo, they didn't have a playable demo. Maybe it was more of a presentation of the things that are present in the game, like the non-playable demos that LucasArts had back in the day. But, even though the first 2 iterations were pretty long, I think the Brian Moriarty one was 18 months. And so after 18 months, they didn't have anything to show for it because the game wasn't ready. There wasn't any actual gameplay. And so there aren't any playable demos.
Interesting. Okay. So it's almost in a disappointing sense because some of the footage I had seen online it just looked so tangible, like something you could get your hands on. When the sprites were slightly different, and I think there was a fourth lead, an Asian character. I can't think of his name.
Toshi Olima.
Toshi, thank you. Yeah, no, it looked quite interesting. And then there's I guess there's also the element of the different art types, which I've heard some critique about, and that I didn't agree with because I didn't really find an issue with it. But I think the overall idea is that there's the main pixel art that we see throughout the game, and then there's the I guess you could say cartoon style cutscenes, and then there's the 3D aspects of it. And I think that it really adds to its personality. Like I appreciated that quite a bit. The only time I found any of that jarring was the alien bug when Maggie is tied up. That he's so 3D compared to everybody else. That was maybe a little weird, and maybe the same to be said with the sea monster. But that's kind of just splitting hairs at that point because I overall really enjoyed it. And I think scenes like the 3D scene where you're looking into the dark tunnel as the crystals kind of gleam off of the walls, like it really adds to the game. I really enjoyed it. So I just wanted to get your guys' takes on that, on the different art styles.
Yeah, I liked it. It took me back to a game like Dragon's Age a little bit or something with those cut scenes because it really did. It hit that cinematic quality. And I don't know, I'd never thought of it even as being jarring. A lot of the games that we played growing up would kind of shift into this alternate reality where it would show this on the commercials. You wouldn't see the actual gameplay. So I think I kind of looked at it like that because I really liked the animation. It was like playing Scooby-Doo or something. It was super fun. I thought it all went together really well.
The different animation styles didn't bother me when I played it for the first time. And in my conversation with Charlie Ramos, who worked on The Dig as an animator, he mentioned the different art styles, and I didn't notice it that much before he said something about it, but now I do. And there are different animation styles, but somehow they make for a cohesive visual experience. I mean, sure, the thing that with the 3D spider, for example, I was used to that from other LucasArts games because Full Throttle, for example, is a 2D point-and-click adventure game, but you have 3D elements. The bikes are 3D, and the cars are 3D. And even in 7 Max See the Road, which was released in 1993, you have the cable car and the largest ball of twine, which is 3D. And then when they enter the cable car, then they turn to 3D elements. and which is supposed to look weird, but looks fine because that was the technology of the time. It's part of the magic.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, I agree. And that's actually a really good point, Daniel, is that it does seem spread throughout or littered throughout the era. So I guess there's a familiarity as opposed to a jarringness. Because even Gabriel Knight 2, which would have been a 95 as well, that has some kind of 3D elements towards the end with the wolf and the maze and such. So
janky 3D elements, yeah.
Yeah, as all Sierra 3D was, just incredibly janky. Yeah, Anna and I tend to shift to the Team Sierra side of things, but one thing I think at least I would happily give Lucas is the art direction. Art style is almost always superior. And one of my positive notes, just since animation had just come up, was that the pixel sprite animation is exceptional. Like, it is insanely good in this game. First thing comes to mind is like when Boston pulls the wire down early in the game, when he yanks it off of the cave ceiling, and just the fluidity, like they were just like at the peak of their trade at that point. And it's nice to see that too, because especially around this time, there was this shift into 3D and this push into even FMV. So it's like pixel art had really kind of was almost reaching its peak, I think you could say, around 95. So it's nice to see animations like that, where it's like this is the best. The kind of the best that it got before they started shifting their attention away from it.
Yeah, I mean, just think that in 1995, LucasArts released Full Throttle and The Dig, while Sierra released Phantasmagoria, Gabriel Knight 2, and Police Quest SWAT, which are all FMV games.
Wow, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I didn't know.
And, and I didn't even see the pixels. When I'd play these games, the Full Throttle games, when I was a kid, I saw them as a cartoon. Like, my brain didn't have a grasp on breaking down the picture into its individual components. So I always saw it as a cartoon picture, and it looked so realistic. In games like this in particular, it's not till, later on and graphics have moved on and you're like, oh, now I can see the components. And of course, making games, you can see that too. But it was invisible to me back then.
But it's not because your perception changed since you were a kid. It's because the CRT screens made that look like it wasn't pixely.
Really? Good call. That's a good point. Huh. I didn't think of that.
For example, if you look at the EGA version of Monkey Island, The Secret of Monkey Island, and the EGA version of Loom, and if you look at the backgrounds, you'd notice that the backgrounds have alternating pixels on blue or... And they use this throughout the game, either to create a shadow in the close-up scenes or in backgrounds to create like a Twilight scene. But when we look at it on modern screens, then you can see each and every pixel. But back in the day on CRT screens, they had that smear effect that made these look as if they were gradients when they weren't. So that's the thing.
Wow, that's
I learned. Yeah, that's cool.
that is kind of blowing my mind. Yeah, because if you think about the to what Daniel, what you were just describing, the kind of Mark Ferrari signature of to our listeners, anybody just picture any random Loom background and where you see you can really make out the gradient of the pixels changing, and with the CRT that would blend it perfectly. And Anna, to your point, I just had this moment the other day where I was looking at. My son's really into logos. So we were looking at like the logo history of things, and we stumbled across the logo history of Microsoft Word. And I just had this moment of like realizing that all the icons back in the day were pixel art. And it was like, for the first moment, I was like seeing them as pixel art instead of as like the Word icon. But then Daniel, you just bring perfect clarity to that. It's like, I didn't see it as pixel art back in the day because of the CRT. It really was just a smoother icon as opposed to, wow, that's cool. Okay, well, we've covered some critiques, we covered some history. Let's there's a lot of positive things to say about this game. And Daniel, am I correct that this is, this is, I guess, the nerdiest question I'll ask, but is this your favorite point and click game if you had to pick one?
So Loom and The Dig are both my top favorite point and click adventure games. Each one has its own. It depends on when you ask that question. If we talk about The Dig, then The Dig is my favorite one. If we'll talk about Loom, then Loom is my favorite one.
That's fair.
But for me, they share the spotlight. They're both great. They both have various, very immersive. They provide a very immersive experience, and they they're visually impressive.
Yes.
Not even for the time. They're visually impressive even to this day.
Well,
I was blown away just this week alone on like the moving shadows, the lights of the crystals, the patterns, and this whole game just blew my mind. I've been blind. Like I showed you, I have the book by the Dean Foster, and I have the strategy guide, but I've never looked into the game on purpose because I didn't want to spoil a game I hadn't completed. So I had no idea what was going to happen all the way through the game. So it made it really intense. I really liked that.
Yeah.
Don't forget that ILM worked on some of the cutscenes. So it's ILM.
Yeah, the art is insane. I mean, to me personally, the pixel art is still my favorite just form of graphic art. Period. And this is just a masterclass in it. It is insane. The purples and oranges that they use in the palette is like just deeply satisfying. And they do things that just make you look at it and be like, that was all by hand. Because I think some of my own. Some of the pieces of art that I do that I'm the most fond of are so heavily credited to what I can do because of Photoshop. So to look at this game and realize that, I think the latter artists on this game were actually using early Photoshop iterations, but they weren't using the gradient effects that we have nowadays. So a lot of these pixels were hand placed, and I'm not sure if the room is called the temple room, but there's one room where it's just drenched in gold glowing light that's seeping through the cracks, and it's just an insane artwork. It is so gorgeous. It's so just fun to look at.
That's the statue room where the big statue is, isn't it? Where there's like yellow light.
Yes. Exactly. It ties into that anyway. No, it is the statue room. Right. Yes, exactly right. So real quick, Dan, just because you bring up Loom and Dig, and both of those obviously coming from Brian well, not obviously at all, but Brian Moriarty having involvement.
Kind of from Brian Moriarty.
Yeah, big old asterisk mark on there. But I'm just curious, because I've never been a text adventure guy just because I didn't grow up on them. But I'm just curious, have you ever been curious to look at Wishbringer or Trinity or the other things that Brian did with Infocom?
No, I haven't played those games, but I do know that the artwork for the manual on some of these games is very similar to what he eventually used in Loom.
Oh, cool.
LucasArts. So a lot of if you look at the games themselves, they may not look the same as Loom, but if you look at the big box and the artwork and the overall experience, then you can see Brian Moriarty's touch all over these.
Yeah. Yeah, and that really says something about Brian himself, because it's as we said earlier in the episode, that you can see Brian. I mean, it's yet to be confirmed, so I could obviously be wrong. I usually am, but you could really kind of sense Brian coming through it, or I would almost put a $5 bill on what parts were Brian's, I guess you could say. Just again back to that fantasy element, or even the crystal aspects of it. There's just this loomy vibe to it. But yeah, okay. So for some sort of structure, let's go through the story just loosely, I guess you could say. It starts off basically with you think that it's going to be the movie Armageddon for about 20 minutes.
Yeah, I'm like, is this thing going to crash into Earth? I thought that's what was going to happen, or they were trying to prevent it from doing so. I had no idea they were going to go like get whisked away. Yeah.
So it's okay, that's right. I've had to pause myself. Like, how do we talk about games? And we decided a while ago that we play them for the listener, sort of. So that being said, yeah, you're at a press conference because there's an asteroid that's pretty much going to hit Earth. I think the game says 99% chance it's going to hit Earth. So they get together a team, not of oil drillers or whatever Armageddon, but Maggie Robbins. Or Robinson? Is it Robin? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Robbins. And she's a journalist. Then you've got Boston Lowe, who plays like the military type, and then you've got Ludger Brink, who is the archaeologist, or I guess scientist, to be more vague.
Mm-hmm. Archaeologist and geologist.
Okay, thank you. So those three are the main characters of the game. Again, this is for the listeners who haven't played it and going to experience it poorly through our words. And then there's two others. There's guy that gets left behind and girl that gets left behind. I'm going to need Daniel.
Ken and Cora.
Thank you. Yes. You'll talk to them on the walkie a little bit in the beginning, and then they get left behind as you dig deeper into the asteroid and find out that it's not at all an asteroid. It's actually an alien ship, and you get whisked away to galaxy bloody far far away. And that brings us to, well, where does that bring us to? That brings us to, I guess, they're in the alien land. They're realizing it's alien. They take off their helmets because they can breathe and all that good stuff. This is, I don't know, the first 30 minutes of this game are really, really fun. And I'll just say for the listeners too, for anybody who's like on the fence about playing, I played this one with my 9-year-old son, and he adored this game. Like he loved this game, and I was shocked and very excited because the last 2 adventures I tried with him, he was not into, and I thought I was losing him a little bit with adventure games. This reeled him right back in. He had a lot of fun with this game, and it was nice too because I was playing it this time around with a walkthrough to get through it to really just refresh myself for this episode. And he kept me from like just direct line, like A to B, get through it with the walkthrough because he just wanted to keep exploring the rooms and reminding me of what it's like and to play an adventure game, basically, by clicking on all the things and just eating up.
Wait, now I'm intrigued. What were the previous 2 games? Were they Sierra games?
Damn you, they were.
No, don't
That's
say it's
the answer
true.
right there.
Yeah, they were. I'm actually blanking on one of the 2, but one of them was Longbow. He was not into Longbow at all.
Nobody is.
Yeah, look, what was the other one? Well, regardless, it was Sierra. But anyway,
Well,
go ahead.
It's a beautiful game. I could see why you get into it, and I mean on another level that perhaps he wasn't noticing, it had a really cool character dynamic just between Boston and Maggie. Because Boston, he's kind of like, oh, I got to take these. He's considering them to be essentially civilians, right? So I think that forces Ludger to be a little bit more almost arrogant, to have to try to hold his place, to be like, hey, I really do need to be here. And Maggie's just this really strong personality who's able to hold her own and fight you back. Like she's not laying back and taking shit from anybody. They're such cool, independent players in this game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I had two notes on that. And one was that I really liked how natural the kind of building tension between Brink and Boston. It was the way it was written was done really well because it didn't feel ham-fisted. You could sense Brink's frustration slowly building, and you could actually kind of like agree with him in a sense where he did seem like the more experienced person for a lot of the tasks on the alien planet, let's say. But at the same time, you understood why Boston would take the lead being the commander. But it was like, again, like devil's advocate was like, well, I don't know. This German guy's kind of right. Like he probably should be the one taking the lead as far as excavation and all that stuff's concerned. So I really liked how that was handled. And then quickly, I'll just say that the other note I had on this part of the game was that women were represented really well in adventure games. And I don't know if a little bit of this comment from mine is feeling like it's maybe a little over exaggerated nowadays. Cause I think if you don't leave Twitter, you might start to feel like if you go back 20 years that women were just like 50s housewives and had no representation, or independence or personality. And it's like, it's not the case at all. Like this was like a very, to today's standards, like a strong, female lead kind of character who didn't take any shit from anybody and knew who she was. And I thought that was good. And to extend that to really, I guess, adventure games in general, they seem to have always handled women well. I guess in large part because especially over at Sierra, there were so many women in charge. So yeah, that was all positive.
Because the whole reason she's there is she suspected stuff was going on, right? So she pulled a lot of strings to get there, and she's trying to get her exclusive. But she's like, oh no, there's a cover up. There's some weird shit going on. So she's coming in there with full intention. So it's not like, I don't know, they made it really real. All the background and the framing, having the other crew members like Ken and Cora, even though they don't come on afterwards, like they've got a whole story and a whole background. You can go and you can research it, and it's interesting.
Daniel, did you read the book by chance? The Dean Allen something Foster book?
No, I haven't. But from what I've read about it, it seems like it's basically covering all of the things that happen in the game, like the cutscenes and the actions that take Boston from one place to another.
Cool.
And not much more. So it seems like a glorified walkthrough.
Okay.
It's kind of like that. That's his reputation for writing books is he adapts. He adapts from movies into books and from games into books. And I think that's essentially what he did. Yeah. Adapted what the game would be with a full walkthrough and put it into a story. Exactly.
I kept hearing everything regarding the book. I kept hearing like the less said about it, the better sort of vibe. Like it's not that it wasn't necessarily like an expansive companion to the game. It was more just like a almost painful explanation of the game. Instead, or something that might be a little harsh on it as a summary, but yeah.
The strategy guide is way more fun. There's information about the characters. There's concept drawings. There was a little comic that they used to pass around the office, just kind of taking snapshots of the daily dev life of making this game. And stuff like that I really enjoy even more so than reading through the storyline.
The daily dev life over the course of 6 years?
Yeah, kind of like that.
A biblical size book.
It would be pretty massive if it was all of it. But yeah, they're cartoons. They were just called, they were posted on the wall by the desk. It was Graham Annabelle, one of the animators that put them together.
Oh, very cool. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I interviewed him.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I said, I think you've interviewed quite a few people related to this game.
I think another aspect, sorry, going back to my son being really gripped in this game was the soundtrack. And that was, I forgot his first name, Michael Land?
Michael Land, yeah.
Land, yeah, you got it.
Okay, and the soundtrack is absolutely masterful. Like it really helps with immersion. It's really cinematic, and it has like a nice I don't know how to explain it, but the outer space scores always have this kind of sense of like weightlessness,
otherworldly effect.
Yes, otherworldly.
Mm-hmm. That's the word.
Yes, yeah. It's just it captures it perfectly. The spirit of the game and just the immersion and everything. So I had to throw that in there, kind of ham-fistedly, if I forgive me. But okay, so anyway, moving along in the story, I guess we could go a little bit further to where the team. Well, okay, we left.
Fun fact about the soundtrack is that I listen to the soundtrack every time I work on my questions for upcoming interviews. So I always listen to the Dick soundtrack when I'm working on.
That's solid. It was actually sold separately as an audio CD. I think it was bundled in some of the demos for LucasArts games, the soundtrack and things. It was definitely worth putting out there.
The soundtrack had demos for LucasArts games, not the other way around.
Oh, is that how it went? Okay, I knew it was something like that. But yeah, it's great. I mean, it's not just it's in the background, but it's thoughtful music. It's thinking, it's discovering music. I could see why you'd put it on in the background. It's intriguing music, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well put. I was thinking the same things when Daniel said that. Like, yeah, it does seem like good. I don't know, like a good work environment kind of setting. Like there's something inspirational about it, but also calming at the same time. Would that CD have been? Because I'm thinking era-wise, like weren't they like the bin and queue kind of CDs where you'd put it in your computer and you could just get the soundtrack right off of it?
No, so the CD that had. The CD that came with a big box didn't have any CD audio. It was recorded audio. And so the soundtrack was the only way you'd be able to hear it in a stereo system all the time.
Gotcha. Okay. Was that almost on purpose so that they could sell the soundtrack separately?
Honestly, I think it had more with the limitations of the CD-ROM drive, because if you'd have to play the CD audio while the CD is reading, the V scenes or data from the CD, then the music would skip. And with streaming digital audio, you don't have that problem. Because, for example, in Loom, when Loom was released in the CD version, then first of all, they had to truncate a lot of the dialogue because CD audio has only 74 minutes. And they had a lot more dialogue. So they had to truncate a lot of dialogue. And they also removed all the close-ups from Loom, the CD version, because the CD-ROM drive couldn't handle playing the music and changing the scenery to the close-up while the music is playing.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So okay. A lot of people were quite upset about the cuts that were made to Loom, and fair enough. So I didn't realize it was because of the audio was to blame for that, which is interesting. And that's an interesting case in itself. I guess would be for a different show. But just because the VGA, the EGA is so gorgeous and such a kind of a masterclass in EGA art that I understand why it's the preferred version. I think Brian Moriarty said it's the only version. But that being said, the VGA version is gorgeous. Like it is still like absolutely. It's so beautiful that it's almost a little unfair how immediately overlooked it is. And I guess if we're going to be really nerdy, the FM Towns version is probably like the definitive as far as the VGA.
Yeah, because the FM Towns version is the EGA version in terms of dialogue and text, and with VGA graphics.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, so it really is like the hybrid. Okay, that's cool.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. I'll swing it. I'll just in a messy sense, just swing us back to Dig and say that next, after you're on the alien planet, okay. So you're on the alien planet. Let's see. This is. I guess I'm building up to the point where the team splits up. And I'll say that I was a little bummed that they split up so soon because I really enjoyed the way they were playing off of each other. I thought maybe they split up a little too soon. What do you guys think?
One of them dies.
Fair. Yeah, that's fair. I mean, it was selfish of him to die, but yeah, that's
it
fair.
was. It kind of reminded me of A Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy when they went to Magrathea. Not that anybody needs to get this, but they end up, splitting off into various directions and going all these grand tours and all these underground things. And it actually had a lot of parallels to the Magrathea. This is me just talking to myself, clearly, but that's okay. I totally see it. Anyways, it's in there, man.
That's fair. All right. So they split. I'm gonna have to watch. Or I mean, no, I'm not gonna read. That's just a lie. I wouldn't read Hitchhikers.
Not.
I guess
don't watch the new movie either. You can watch the old BBC television series. That's okay.
That sounds painful. Yeah, I think I'll skip the whole thing and just
just live with my knowledge.
I'll just roll the dice that next time you bring it up, there might be a little bit of a silence, and that's just the way it's gonna have to be.
It's there, man. Who's going to write in and say, yeah, I totally see it too, just like Magrathea. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. It'll be worth it for those three listeners that were like, I got you. Actually, if we were on YouTube, I'd be like, you drop a comment below if you got what Anna's talking about.
Well, we are on YouTube technically. So.
Right, yeah, so do a comment. Don't worry about it, guys. Okay, anyway. Yeah,
but yeah, no, they split off pretty quickly. One of them dies. I mean, he's Brink kind of is like, I can do this, and I think he totally can, and he should because he's the excavator. But he goes to dig this thing on the surface, and then just totally falls in the hole and dies, which caught me off guard. I had no idea one of the main characters was going to die right away. I was just getting into liking the guy for his I liked his kind of attitude that he had.
Yeah, exactly. Same. I was rooting for my son. Did he's stood up and put his hands on his cheeks like Home Alone style and was like, "Oh damn!" Like he had like a YouTuber react to him dying, so which was kind of neat. I
traumatized my 9-year-old by having him watch the main character die.
Oh, he was traumatized long before this.
And actually, that reminds me. The other Sierra game that he didn't like was Leisure Suit Larry. Speaking of traumatizing my kid, yeah, he was just like, Dad, this is inappropriate. I'm going to my room.
Oh my God. Even my 13-year-old, he's like, I was playing Reloaded.
He sounds like the responsible adult in your family.
The only one. But yeah, I was clicking the dildo on everybody and Reloaded as a side. You can take the purple dildo out of the cabinet and click it on everybody in the game if you randomly want to go off and spend money on a taxi. And I'm like, Jacob, this is so funny. Check it out. He's like, Mom, no, this is not funny. Stop doing that. And he just left the room again. I thought it was funny. Anyway.
He would have too if you weren't, his mom.
I don't know. Maybe he's the kind of kid that'll be like, wow, that chick's hot. And I'm like, so am I. Are you supposed to say that? But anyways, normally he's pretty good about that stuff. So
he's had a Freudian upbringing, he understands.
It all comes back to the mother. I guess that's just how it is.
Which Leisure Suit Larry did you play?
Well, we played the first one. We played the VGA remake, and then we played Reloaded just to put some flavor spice on the episode.
Yeah, and Reloaded was the one I invited him to play with me, and he was just he was not into it. No. And it wasn't even like the sexual aspects of it that he wasn't into. He was just bored by it in general. He kept calling it ugly, which is not fair to the game, first of all, but it also made me kind of happy because I think he's so used to pixel art that he's like he wasn't even sure what he was looking at.
And that was the problem.
Yeah, exactly. That was the problem. Is that it was that damn newfangled 2D art with the smooth lines and all that. So no good. All right. So anyway, the Brink dies. There's shocking all throughout the household. Maggie ends up in what becomes known as the library, and she's in there like learning the language, I guess you could say. And also, sorry, on Brink's death, I'll just say that was I liked how realistic the death was. Like, it wasn't like this really dramatic big fall and like neck break. It was more like, yeah, that is like people actually die that way. It was like a pretty small fall and like a hit to the head. And like, that's usually good enough. It wasn't cinematic in a kind of jarring sense. For some reason, it kind of shook me a little bit in its lack of dramatics, I guess you'd say. But I liked it.
Yeah, and the loss of trust, for Boston a little bit from Maggie, and then just the sort of the realization that, dude, you're not a leader here. Nobody's a leader here. We're all just trying to make it happen and not get killed and maybe go home. So it's a bit of like a realization moment for everybody. Too little, too late at the time, but big deal.
Right. Yeah. Well put. Okay. Okay. So yeah, Maggie, geez Louise, Maggie heads off to learn the other language. Which I had pedantic critiques of. Like, I thought that maybe that was handled in a kind of an odd way, that they really dedicated, like, she's going to be learning language, and by the end she's going to have it down. I thought that was a little, I don't know. I thought that was a little weird. I think at the time I was more just mad that she wasn't staying with Brink, because I enjoyed their little power struggle banter.
But apart from her being a journalist, she's a linguistics expert.
Oh, okay. And that brings up...
That's why she was brought on board. Nobody cares about the reporting part.
Thank you. Ah, right. Okay. And I did hear that. Okay. Now that makes me completely comfortable with it again. I really actually appreciate you saying that, because that was a little hang up I had with the game. Where it was annoying me throughout, because I completely forgot about the linguistic part. Okay.
Yeah, and she's totally like, she was a private school kid who ended up having to go to a more open private school, and she was always kind of an anti-authoritarian. So she's a powerful force.
Very cool. Okay. Did you get that part from the?
Yeah. Is it from the book or the hint guide?
Yeah.
Oh, all of that's from the bios and the hint guide. I read that before we came on. That was really cool.
That's definitely somebody who grew up on big boxes and feelies, like digging into manuals for the backstory. Or maybe, would it be fair to say it's almost a Sierra thing? Because they always put so much of their damn story in the book in the box as opposed to in the game, especially in the AGI era.
It was a 90s thing.
Right, yeah, that's more fair. You're right.
Well, they did this book, the hint guide, in the style that they did some of the other hint books, as in it's even the police quest ones. They're telling a story and you have to understand what to do through the story. So, they always add little elements in, and they're not literally saying turn left, pull switch. It's like, oh, you walk into the room and there's all these switches. Maybe we should figure out what to do with them, kind of thing.
All right. So story-wise, let's see. I'm not doing a great job of this, but at least I am doing a job of it, I guess you'd say.
Usually I do this, so I'm really proud of you.
Is that what it is? Okay, yeah. I feel just like lost in the desert right now, just trying to piece together some sort of coherence. But okay, so Brink's dead, check. Maggie's learning a language because she's a linguistic expert. Thank you, Daniel. Check. And so next, I guess, and as far as just summarizing it is... okay, well, Brink's already dead. Sorry, I got lost in my own notes there. I guess
we're trying to figure out the intentions, I guess, of what's going on here and why are we here now that we're here? Not just how to leave, but they want to know what's going on too. They're collecting and they're making historical finds.
Right. So yeah, part 5 get a lot of gems and plates and things like that. Because really, my next note goes right to using the crystal on Brink, but. And it feels too soon to be saying that, but I guess there's not a lot of story in between Brink dying and that, or am I missing a huge chunk of game here?
Well, using the crystals on him I said I was only about 45 minutes into my playthrough when I got to that part. So you're going around, you're picking
early
some
in the
stuff.
game.
It is.
It is. because it's such a huge part of the story. And I also love the close up they do on the green crystal. There's this one where you're kind of holding it in your hand and just sort of like in awe of what it is. I love that scene.
Yeah, I've got that pulled up here too. I guess I guess I'm going to keep bringing my son up because he brings like a childlike wonder or innocence to the gameplay that I haven't felt since I played it for the first time, I was losing him a little bit wandering around getting the plates and things like that, and like I could feel his interest waning a little, and then the pacing wise was perfect because as soon as you use the crystal on Brink and Brink comes back, that he was hooked back in again. But then the game does a really good job of setting like just a weird subtly ominous tone with Brink, where like he comes back and just flashes. They really did this with a light touch because he just flashes like a quick little look on his face, and even my 9-year-old picked that up immediately. Like he came back different. There's something different about Brink now, and I was more impressed with it. I guess the animation. Or the specific, that specific scene, because it read perfectly to my kid, like, hey, he's back, but he's a little bit different. And they didn't like dwell on it or like really like, rub your nose in it. It was just like a quick little subtle thing. And there was no confirmation yet or anything like that. Like you just think he's back and he's feeling great, better than ever. But that was a really, really cool element to this game because I could tell from there on out, like my kid felt like a sense of unease, like kind of like a flinchy, like wondering what's around the next turn kind of vibe. Like it really, really kind of just creeped out the whole experience in a good way. Yes. So anyway, okay. So Brink comes back. He says he's feeling better than ever, and I think at this point the story's in like full swing now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And you're starting to like follow his descent into madness almost because he doesn't even start off like you absolutely know something's up. It's just sort of happening. Yeah,
exactly. So Daniel, before I go further, what are some of your like takes on just the story up until this point? Like really, I'm sorry for not giving you a more like focused question, but just like, I don't know, maybe even on a nostalgic point of view, like playing this as a kid, like where were you at mentally at this point in the game story?
Well, when Steven Spielberg first described the story of the Dig, he described it as a marriage between Treasure of the Sierra Madre and Forbidden Planet. And the Treasure of the Sierra Madre is pretty much has the same plot devices of the team members going against each other. And so it's very similar to that. So that's why they had to split up eventually, because each one had his own or her own agenda.
Right.
And the fact that, part of the magic of the Dig is the exploration and Boston's solitude, because even though he's on this planet with 2 other people, he's pretty much alone most of the game. Yeah. And Brink at some point becomes the antagonist, so he's not part of the team anymore. And Maggie is, the spider gets hold of her. And so Boston's pretty much alone in the game. And I really like that part because, usually with LucasArts adventure games, a lot of the gameplay is the dialogue. Yeah. But over here, you had Boston talking to himself every now and then. But the story unfolded, very much like an Alien. You see things that happen. It's a slow burn, basically. And I love the fact that it's a slow burn because in adventure games back in the day, you couldn't create a game that was a slow burn because players would get bored pretty quickly. And apparently players got bored pretty quickly of the Dig. And maybe that was one of its problems. But for me, it's part of its magic.
Yeah. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I guess I think I was almost trying to have cake and eat it too by saying I wish they stuck together because there is that element of isolation that you get from being alone as Boston. There's like a little bit of fear of the unknown and things like that you wouldn't experience if you had company around you.
I totally thought that you were going to be able to switch characters and control characters, thinking of other LucasArts games. So when they split off, I thought you were going to get a control panel for each of them and a character switch button. I was like positive that was going to happen.
What's interesting too about the boredom comment is I feel like there's so much packed into the first like 30 minutes or so that I'll just speak for myself. That was enough for me, where like I felt fulfilled. I didn't feel at all bored. Like there was so much stimulation in the first 30, 40 minutes of the game to getting to the point of isolation that I felt like the game had earned its time for slow burn. You know, like it had enough, what would you say, like good faith, I guess, stored up after so much excitement.
Yeah, but for example, Anna lost interest after 20 minutes when she was a kid. So apparently...
Right.
I said, you know what happened? I went into the game in that iPad thing, and you know where you land the asteroid, and I thought I had to land it properly to forward the game, and I got stuck in that loop, and I just couldn't land that asteroid in the game over and over and over and over, and I quit. I think that's what happened. I had so many other games in the archive to play, because I didn't do well in that one, and I didn't do well in Afterlife. I tried really hard because I wanted to get good in Afterlife, but they were just, to me at the time, two of the trickiest ones in the box.
Right. Yeah, and maybe that's more to say was maybe an early puzzle. And it makes me think of like when I was bailing on Leisure Suit Larry, I think 7, where it immediately starts out with a pretty difficult puzzle, and I walked away instead at the time. But
but in this case, it's probably one of the only dialogue puzzles in the game.
It wasn't even a puzzle. I literally had to call them. I honestly, when I figured that out, I was like, geez, man, I was laughing at myself, shaking my head and saying, Anna, clearly, girl, you had no patience when you got this game. Because that was entirely me. This is not the game at all.
And if anything, actually, in the beginning, I got stuck. Not stuck, but I had a little bit of a hard time after planting the bombs, trying to get them to explode because I don't know, I just didn't think to use the telecom to talk to the other people. I kept talking to the two that were immediately in front of me as opposed to on the intercom. So it took me a while to get the bombs to actually blow. But anyway, okay. All right, so Brink's dead. We did that. No, Brink's okay. So Brink's revived. That's where we're at. Sorry.
Now he's alive.
He's back. Yeah, he's back again. He feels better than ever. So this is, as Dana, you were saying, the team's kind of pursuing their own objectives at this point, which is neat too, because it does highlight, as far as character growth, it's like you could their own, I guess, differing like beliefs and priorities take over. So the characters start doing what they're interested in, I guess. At least a way to put it. Brink's becoming more like increasingly unstable due to his obsession with the life crystals. So, and then from a player point of view, you're really sensing that there's like an addiction quality, which I think Boston does say it, but yeah, you're sensing this like addiction quality to the crystals, this obsession growing between Brink and them. And so, you know that, yeah, you can sense, I guess Brink becomes unhinged a little faster than he becomes a rival in the beginning of the game. Like I was saying earlier, the pacing of that was really nice, that he very naturally and slowly becomes a rival or I don't know, at odds, I guess, with Boston. Whereas with the crystals, it doesn't happen quickly, but it doesn't happen slowly either. But it also makes sense too. I guess all I'm trying to say is the pacing is again done quite well with the madness setting in with Brink and all that. Maggie's trying to learn the alien language in the library. She's really quite grumpy about interrupting her, which hurt my feelings because I was so proud to finally found her, and she just yells at me to leave. And
I know. You're like, hey, it's you. She's like, would you quit following me for real though? You're like, but there's another exit. You're not gonna die in here. And she's like, whatever.
Yeah, she gave me Sophie vibes because Sophie in Fate of Atlantis is pretty mean to you. She's pretty abusive throughout that game. It was yeah. Okay, so then this is I guess more or less where you learn about the alien race, or you learn that they're the creators, and that that they've built this stuff, which is a really big reveal. I think I'm underselling that a little bit by reading notes to the audience, but you've spent a lot of the game wondering exactly what's going on, and you're finally getting like a little bits of clues or a little bit of facts, I guess you could say, behind like what's actually going on, with who the aliens actually are. And then I guess
the museum exhibits and everything are pretty cool. The moving morphing museum exhibits, man, that and the crystals changing and stuff in all these parts, like from when you have to select them to go through the panels, the morphing and changing of the scenery on the screen, I'm obsessed with. It's beautiful. I want it on my screensaver, just constantly morphing like that.
Yeah. I agree. The texture and the gradient of that scene alone, like the background part of that, is so satisfying and so beautiful. And then the sound effect is incredibly satisfying. So good. Did you guys realize, or to the extent of the clues that was offering? Because I was thinking very short term, and I didn't realize that those morphing moments, I can't think what to actually call them, but they offer a lot of insight, like even for like an hour into the game.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that you get a sense of what needs to happen. I think, for example, with a bomb that needs to be placed in the turtle. So you get that sense from those panels. But other than that, most of the times you realize after the fact what they meant.
Right, okay.
Yeah, that's how it was
you complete
for me,
a puzzle. Yeah, you complete the puzzle and then you say, hey, okay.
Hey, what do you know? It was, one of the puzzles that caught me stuck for a while, and it seems unreasonably easy on this end, is the one where you have to create the bridges, but you have to hold down the button to make the light bridges happen. There's something about holding it down instead of clicking that just makes it the trickiest thing to figure out. But when I did finally figure out, it was very satisfying.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't really think about that. That might be one of the only times in an adventure game where holding the mouse button is the answer, and it's so hidden in plain sight that it is. I guess you could almost feel kind of foolish for not getting it, because it's on paper it's an easy solution, but it's really not. If you've been trained in the art of point and click adventures, like that's not something usually in our toolbox. I
think that all types of control changes mid-game that aren't listed in the manual are problematic. So, for example, in Phantasmagoria 2, you have the portal at the end, and instead of left-clicking on the mouse, you need to right-click. Right. It's not listed anywhere, and you need to guess that. So, with this particular puzzle, I think I figured it out pretty fast. But it's only because at the time, any mouse actions were pretty new to us. Right. So it seemed like holding a button is counterproductive, but then you realize that that's the solution to that puzzle.
Right.
I like that. It's one of those just simple genius puzzles. I used to have a heated jacket because I'm a bit of a wimp in the wintertime, and it's got a button on it, and when you hold down the button, it turns on. And when you hold it down again, it turns off. And the kids at my son's school, they'd been about grade 1, grade 2. They all would want to turn on my jacket, and they'd all come up and they'd touch the button, and they're like, "Oh, your jacket doesn't work." And that was my magic trick, holding down the button, turning it on. And they're all like, "Whoa." They never figured it out. Right? It took my kid, I used to tease him with that trick. It took him 6 months to figure out holding down the button. So it's really not a thing we automatically go to as human beings.
Man, that's an oddly accurate analog for this puzzle. That fits really well. Okay, so before I move along too quickly, because I'm actually running out of steps in the storyline, Daniel, I want to go to you specifically. Of what has happened in the game up until this point, what are some standouts for you? Whether it's just in fun facts or in frustrations or in favorites, anything.
Well, I really like Anna said, I really like the part with life crystals. The cutscenes were really impressive, and I like the way that the story was built in this particular instance with the life crystals, because, like you said, if your kid realized the fact that Brink came back different, then it means that they've done their job right. And the same goes for me, because back then I realized that Brink came different. So I love the fact that a lot of the things that happen in the game aren't exactly dialogue related, because even though I knew English at that point in time, I did know it that well to cover all of the subjects that they discuss in the game, but anything that can be said or hinted towards without any dialogue was welcome.
Right. That makes sense. Was a game like The Dig more difficult for being new to, I guess, understanding the English language or whatever, just because there's so many, I mean, frankly, there's just so many big words and just like odd subject matters and things like that. Was it more difficult to follow?
But that's the thing. Most of the puzzles there don't require any knowledge of the English language. You need to know English to understand the story. But most of the time, most of the puzzles were not like the monkey wrench puzzle or any puzzle where you need to understand something that they said. Most of the puzzles are pretty standalone puzzles, like the claw. The claw is something mechanical, and it's a logic puzzle. You need to understand the sequence. Same goes with the turtle puzzle. Same goes with the light bridge that you need to hold the button to activate the light bridge. And most of the puzzles are not dialogue puzzles, apart from the first one. But it seems that even you guys struggled with this one.
Yeah,
so
we did.
Yeah,
and it seems most of the dialogue
it wasn't
in
a
the
language
game
barrier.
Right.
No, it seemed not. And I mean, not even all the dialogue in the game was necessary. Like, I have a feeling, although I clicked every dialogue option on everybody, like I always do when I play a game, I think I could have skipped 70% of that and it wouldn't have affected my gameplay other than missing some details and, some cool dialogue.
Exactly. I recently played Sam & Max City Road, and I noticed that a lot of the puzzles have to be solved through dialogue. So you have to go through all of the dialogue options. And in Sam & Max, you get icons just like you get them in The Dig. So,
right.
I have a friend in Estonia who said he had a really hard time with the King's Quest games because all of the puzzles were based in fairy tales that he just simply wasn't familiar with growing up. And it relied so heavily on knowledge of these fairy tales that it made it really super difficult for him to complete at the time.
Daniel, I have an oddly personal question. I'm just out of curiosity. Do you? I hope this isn't rude. Do you? I'm proceeding anyway. But do you ever think in English, or are all your thoughts in your native language?
That's a great question, because I recently talked to Paul about this, because when I rewatched some of our live streams, I can tell you whether or not I'm sleep deprived or exhausted during the live stream, because usually, given the fact that I've been, I learned English like 30 years ago or 30 plus years ago. And so I can think in English, and a lot of the times I know English words that I forget in Hebrew.
Wow.
And so I say the word in English, even when I speak Hebrew. But when I'm sleep deprived, then that part of my brain doesn't work that well. So, what I do is I say the phrase to myself in Hebrew, and then I translate it verbatim. And it's not always how you say it in English. And so a lot of the times I notice that when I say something like that, I realize that I was sleep deprived in that particular live stream.
Very cool. That's quite fascinating. So your English is, let's say, so good that it's more of a stream, a solid stream of consciousness. But if
I usually think in English, especially when I talk in English. But when I'm sleep deprived and my verbal abilities aren't that, let's say, my verbal abilities don't work that well in those particular instances, then in order to keep the conversation going, I think in Hebrew, and then I translate it to English. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Very cool. Okay, and I got one more language one. This is just from me being a Jew. I'm just curious. Do you guys learn Yiddish in Israel? Like, is that?
Nah.
No. Okay.
Nobody does.
Nobody does. Okay, that's fair. Is it? Yeah. It almost seems like like back in the like a boomer generation sort of thing at this point. I'm not sure. Besides,
it's not a boomer generation. The Hasidic Jews over here do speak in Yiddish.
Okay.
But they live in the Stone Age, so.
Right. There's boomer vibes, but yeah, I get what you're saying. Okay, I'll bring it back to the game and say, is this game? Because Danny, you had mentioned earlier the logic puzzle thing, and that's a note I had my note just says odd amount of logic puzzles. Is this the most amount of logic puzzles for a LucasArts game? Would you guys say? It's just because, I guess that's not really the question I have. I'm more wondering, I think I'm more wondering where all the logic puzzles suddenly come from in the Dig, because you don't really see a ton of logic puzzles like this in that era.
I think that most of the logic puzzles come from the fact that you can't have dialogue puzzles because you don't have anyone to talk to, and you don't have inventory puzzles because you don't have that big of an inventory. You have the shovel, and you use the shovel like 50 times throughout the game, which is why the game is called the Dig, probably, because you actually dig all the way through. And so I think that the reason for the standalone puzzles was either because they had to, when Sean Clark became the project lead, then they had to ship the game. They didn't care about the fact that they had different animation styles and that every artist brought his animation style into the game. And they didn't care about any of that. They wanted to release the game for, the holiday season of 1995. And so logic puzzles are the easiest puzzles because you don't have to create a flow chart of the things that the player needs to pick up from a certain location and then talk to that person and then solve that puzzle. Every puzzle is like a key. You need to find the key, and the key is a certain combination of things or a logic puzzle.
I did find... Oh, go ahead if you want.
Well, that's a very satisfying answer, because it makes such immediate sense, because there's like you said, there's much less to account for in general with a logic puzzle, as far as checking 50 variables or accounting for different alternate scenarios that the player might find themselves in. It's a lot more cut and dry. Yeah, very satisfying answer. Go ahead, Anna.
I was just saying, if there ever was a game that was kind of a bit of a place where you could use a hotspot finder as a modern gamer, this would be considered one. Not that I personally want one, but I did find on a lot of scenes it was kind of hard to discern where the plate was or where a little mound was, that I was doing the thing where you're just scaling your mouse across the screen back and forth in kind of a grid-like pattern to see, because there was a few times I couldn't find something. It turns out it was a depression over here, or it was a little outcropping here, but it was harder to discern. So I did find a lot of time puzzling in that way, just like literally moving my mouse around.
Right.
Well, this happened in most of the LucasArts games of the time.
It did.
They had to simplify everything to get the game out there. The Dig is also the only LucasArts game with a cursor that is highlighted, similar to what they did with the FMV games. Sierra did with the FMV games. So with Phantasmagoria, you have one cursor that lights up whenever there's a hotspot. And you got the same with the Dig. Loom also had what you need to, you need to cast the drafts on the object. So the drafts themselves are like the verbs. So it's not like a cursor that you use to click on things. So the Dig is the only LucasArts adventure game that has that interface.
Was development-wise, was the Dig always designed like this? Do you know, Daniel, or were earlier iterations?
No, it wasn't. Earlier iterations had 6 verbs. They had push and pull, and they had different icons. There are various screenshots from Naw's Dig and Brian Moriarty's Dig, and you can see that they had a different interface, different sprites, vastly different plot in certain parts of the game. So,
that's pretty cool. And I know we'd sort of touched on this earlier. Anna, you had brought up the Insane engine, but was the final iteration just Scum VM? Is that correct?
It says that the cutscenes
is the emulator. Scum is the engine.
Yeah, Scum was the engine, but they still used Insane for the cutscenes, and I think they used iMuse for the audio.
How does that even work development-wise? How do you use this? How do you use two different engines? Like they implement
the Insane engine was the engine that Vince Lee created for Rebel Assault in order to be able to stream full screen video. Because back then the Scum engine had its limitations. So, for example, you couldn't have more than 40% of the screen animated at any given point. So having full screen animation was problematic, given this limitation. So the Insane engine was used for the cutscenes, and they used it in Rebel Assault for the video scenes, and then they used it in Full Throttle for the cutscenes, as well as on the Dig.
Yeah, and I think
And
Outlaws.
the iMuse is the engine they use for the music since Monkey Island 2.
Yeah.
Right, iMuse is an engine. Okay. Huh. Sorry, I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around just compiling one game from multiple engines, but that's probably a pretty significant rabbit hole I just have to go down.
It's very similar. This particular workaround that they did, it's very similar to what Sierra did with Phantasmagoria 2. If you played Phantasmagoria 1, you notice that the FMV scenes are part of the SCI engine. So, for example, you have FMV scenes in which you can use the cursor and click on things during the FMV scene. And this doesn't happen in Phantasmagoria 2 because in Phantasmagoria 2, they wanted to have high-quality 16-bit video during the cutscenes, and SCI had 8-bit interface. So in order to have the 16-bit video, whenever there's a cutscene or an FMV scene in Phantasmagoria 2, SCI shuts down, and then the video player pops up in the background and plays the video scene. And then when the FMV scene is over, then the video player shuts down and SCI restarts.
It's kind of like QuickTime. There was a few games like that. Yeah.
Exactly. So the Insane engine is similar to that, with whenever they wanted to display something that was outside the capabilities of the Scum engine, then they'd use Insane.
Okay, that helps me understand. Thank you. And a quick question, just because we're on Phantaz 2 really quickly. From what I understood, there's a lower res like DOS only version. So in the DOS version, would SCI have handled the video scenes? Like, is that what made the DOS version lower res?
No, in the DOS version you have the 8-bit scenes, but it works similarly just with a different player because it uses different files for the 16-bit and the 18-bit.
Gotcha. Okay. That's satisfying. Thank you. Okay.
So I just want to take 1 second before we move on to give a nod to the creatures. Everything from the bats in this game to like these little, like there was, I think, eels, flying eels, those little rodents that come running around, like the one you had to use for a puzzle. I was really impressed with the detail and these creatures that I'd never seen before anywhere else. I mean, entirely original, the guardian beast and all that. Like, I loved the creatures in this game.
So one interesting thing about the bats was, we talked about the fact that the original game was much gorier than the final version. So one of the puzzles, if you remember in the game, is that you have to use the flashlight on the bats to get them to frighten Brink when he's in that opening. But the original solution for that, you had to poke out the eye of the monster from the lagoon and then cut its eye out, cut the lens out of its eye and place it on the flashlight, because that, for some reason, was the only thing that the bats were afraid of. And so that was the gorier solution to that puzzle.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
That's amazing. Gosh, there is every part of me that loves the gory stuff that would just would love to see a complete version of one of those earlier iterations.
Before Jurassic Park ruined it for everyone.
Like Toshia Lima walking into acid.
Oh, that's how he would have died? No way.
Yeah, dude.
Awesome. All right, I'll move us through because we're pretty much at more or less towards the end of the story. We've got where we left the listeners off anyway was everyone had gone their separate ways. Brink was becoming more and more maddened, I guess, was kind of losing his mind over the life crystals, trying to collect them, and his obsession was growing, you could say. So then we get kind of to like the climax, like towards the confrontation resolution, I guess you could say, where the conflict with the team members has reached a peak. Sorry, I'm blatantly reading notes. I'm just going to call myself out on that.
Couldn't tell it all.
Sounds natural to me.
Let's see. The storyline includes themes of sacrifice, the ethics of using power to... Right, okay, that's just too much there, Corman. Take it easy. So, yeah, I think I might want to just go ahead and skip that whole part of my notes there. It's just it's nonsense.
A lot of back and forth, making bridges appear, getting panels, putting panels and things, turning on lights and turning off lights, and then you're back into it with you partner back up eventually with Maggie again, and the dynamic duo after dealing with a bit of Ludger on the brink of madness. Huh?
Much better than I could do. Yeah, I'm not going to. Yeah, can't.
So, anyways, yeah, he's gotten all weird, and you guys have to deal with him, and then you guys have to deal with the rest of being on the planet next.
Right. Exactly. Okay. Can one of you two take over for how Brink dies?
Well, he's built a new device, right? And he's you come in, and you guys are kind of like, we want to have these crystals. We're going to make new crystals. We're going to make your device work. We got the piece to make it work, right? But we can't make it work yet. And so you put it in, and you kind of get him to agree with the deal. And then you take the 2 new crystals it made, and then he gets angry, right? And he's like, hang on, I want all the crystals. I'm not letting you have any crystals. And you made my machine not work, so I'm going to kill you, was kind of how it set it off.
That was awesome. I enjoyed that. You kind of described that almost as like a high school drama playing out. And then he was all like, and I was like, what?
It was pretty dramatic, though. So, I mean, that's it. You're in the tussle. And honestly, Brink ends up dying again, but Boston didn't mean to kill him. He had no intention of doing it. And you could see it on him afterwards. He's like, I did not want any of this to happen that way. And so Maggie's kind of like, it's okay. He wasn't even really who he was anymore.
Right.
But you could see, I mean, this is just kicking Boston's ass all the way through this mentally.
Yeah, but us as players, we care less about Brink. He died once.
Yeah.
He had his time.
We're just like, yeah, you're already dead. As a player, I'm just like, well, that's good. Now you guys can move on to doing stuff. But this is great because now we have the crew together again. And Boston and Maggie, they're off and they're doing their thing, and she's following him, and they're having their banter again. So, Paul, you must have been happy.
Yes, I was happy. And that's, I guess I'll kind of skip us to Maggie turning on the machine and them having a brief conversation before, and she's like, hey, if I come back, don't revive me with the life crystal, and Boston says the same, don't revive me either. And then Boston suspects Maggie of lying, that she knows more than she's letting off, that turning this machine on might kill her. And I didn't write the exact line down, but Maggie says something that as the player convinced me that she was lying, which she was, but it was, I don't know, he's like, if you're lying, vague threat. And she's like, yeah, I know. I forgot. It was her response to that, though. It was very telling that she was definitely lying.
While she was dying, you realized that she knew that she'd die, but she had to do it so that they'll be able to go back.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. Well put. Okay. And so she does. And so, Brink heads off, and, I appreciated that as he's going to cross one of the light bridges, that one of the creatures shows up again, and I was emotionally exhausted at this point. So I was really glad that the game kind of messes with you a little bit, because it made me feel like I was going to have to do something basically at all to handle this creature, and you kind of don't. Where he falls off the light bridge. But you need
to turn it off first.
Yeah. Thank you. You're right. Yeah. Without much more than the click of a button or so, you don't have to do too much. So that was nice, because it was one of those moments where I'm like, oh, please don't be like some boss level difficulty puzzle right now. Like, I didn't want anything to interfere with the story at that point too. So yeah, that was nice, and it was good. A good move player wise, because it's like give the player something to do because they just got through a cutscene, but otherwise let them keep going with a little fake out, I guess you'd say. And then we get to basically the ending, which is a bit of an exposition dump, where Maggie translates, and that was handled well. I like how you kind of perceptively almost switch to Maggie, not in a playing sense, but
I was wondering how they were going to do that, because she actually technically doesn't explain to him what the conversation was about after, which I understand constraints in this game, and you just have to believe. But I did notice it.
Yeah. It was handled kind of fluidly and nicely, where you almost hear it as Maggie, who understands that language, and so therefore it's spoken in English, and that seems maybe a little bit much as far as. It's a lot of information. How do you pronounce that? Cockington?
So when I talked to Bill Tiller, it was the first time I heard the name pronounced out loud. So they are called Cassitans, and the planet is called Cassitas.
Oh, see, I was pronouncing it so wrong.
Me too. For 30 years.
We all had a more phallic take on what it actually was. Okay.
Well
Exactly.
But he's good. I mean, he's a big guy. This is the main guy. He's the great inventor, and he's a big guy. He's like, I don't know, what did he look like? He was like 10 feet tall, and he had great wisdom and great sadness. There was almost like a resignation
And
to
a
his
goatee.
existence. And a goatee. Adorable, though. I mean, and you know what? I think they do the same thing. If they found us on their planet when everything was still going, I almost feel like they would have considered us animals, maybe put us into a zoo or something. Because as exhibits, as they were just naturally a curious species, I'm not sure that they would have considered us on the level. But in this circumstance, we were okay with them and they were okay with us.
Yes, and to the listeners, I don't know if it's fair to project that, but I got like a Dark Crystal kind of vibe from their aesthetic design. Like I don't know, not necessarily like exactly like a Skeksis or anything like that, but just had that that fantasy element. But it's not, by no means is it like a stereotypical alien or anything like that at all. But yeah, anyway.
By the way, the name of the planet is written on the big box, but never mentioned in the game. It's mentioned in the game's novelization, but it's not mentioned in the game.
Oh,
That's why
right.
we don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh, fair. Okay, that's just off the hook. Nice. What are before I just or I should say, instead of just poorly describing it to everybody, let me get both of your takes on the ending. I'll start with Daniel. Start with you. What's your summary of the ending of the game? Did you find it satisfying? What's your takeaways?
I found it satisfying, and I also like the fact that there are two endings, because you can revive Maggie and you can leave her there and let the alien revive her in the end.
I didn't know.
I love that part.
Yeah, I didn't revive her. I like the alien reviver, because that's what you promised, right?
Yeah, but promises are there to break. So I revived her. So I saved the game, and I revived her just so I could see what would happen. So the main difference is that she's angry at you at the end, as opposed to smiling at you at the end.
Wow. So you get that real visual movie theater style smile at the very end that she's super happy with.
So she's angry if you revive her. And so that's the main difference.
That's amazing.
But I like the fact that it gave you the option to revive her.
Yes.
Instead of letting Boston say, no, I promised Maggie.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's that good adventure game stuff. As long as just being able to exhibit that little rebellious streak and try it anyway. That's like the spirit of the genre to me, encapsulated in one moment. That's very cool. Like I'm like happy for the game.
I really like the ending. The ending resonated with me, and I it's part of the reason why I like the game. The ending was satisfying, and the fact that you don't see the way home. Just see them entering the new spacecraft, and that's it. The game ends. So I really like that ending, the way they edited it and implemented it in the game.
Yeah, agreed. My son and I had a nice 20-minute talk on what he imagined would have happened when they got home, which is like the fruits of not describing it to the audience, right? Where we got to play with our imaginations and have theoretical discussions on what it implied and what might have happened when they returned home. And it was best left exactly the way it was. Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, it was good. I felt the same way. I was imagining him going back and telling everybody the next episode essentially was in my head. And then how was Brink going to do? I mean, he looked like shit at the end. You're just like, dude, you do not look okay. Even on the back off sprite.
You look like 50 years older.
Yeah.
Just here's some old guy. And then they do kind of a close up on him. I'm just like, whoa, buddy. This has been harder on you than anybody else. But it was great. I liked the whole idea. I liked going back to talk about what had happened. I liked, putting the idea of putting some of them at peace and, just going in and messing with their whole world, throwing panels around and just removing them, digging giant holes in places. I thought that was great. It really tied in together well at the end.
Yeah. All right. Well, okay. Sorry, that sounded so douchey. Yeah. All right.
All right. Well, now that she's
whatever
done.
You guys say. You nerds.
That's fair.
Okay, now that we've reached the end of the story, is there, Daniel, I'm just curious if you have any more fun facts or development kind of things that you've learned from talking to people that made the game, or anything we could shoehorn in that's just fun fun to talk about or
Well,
hear.
there are tons of fun facts. The one thing I'm surprised that you didn't talk about was the voice acting. That
right.
Boston Lowe is voiced by Robert Patrick.
Right. By from Terminator 2, yes.
2. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I always imagined that it would be great for me to get Robert Patrick for an interview and just talk to him about the dig for like 5
I
hours.
love that.
Oh, that's awesome.
It's like bringing on Tim Curry to just talk about, say, Frankenstein or something.
Right, exactly.
Or Gabriel Knight.
Yeah, exactly.
I had God, I'm struggling for his name now, but Toonstruck, Back to the Future guy. Jeez,
Christopher Lloyd.
Thank you. Hey, man, that wasn't going to come to me either, because when you said it, I'm like, that wasn't even close to on deck. But he was at the Denver Comic-Con recently, and I was really tempted to go all the way down there just to hit him with Toonstruck questions instead of anything else. But okay, let me get both of your guys' thoughts on the voice acting, because I'll summarize my thoughts quickly and say that I thought the quality of the voice acting was A+ across the board. Really, all 3 lead characters did a great job. Maybe Brink could have committed a little more to the German vibe, but regardless, it was quality acting. But it did sound like maybe they weren't recording in the same room or at the same time. Like it sometimes it felt like the conversations, like the one actor wasn't exactly aware of what the other one had just said.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys pick up on that at all?
I think it has to do with voice directing at that point, because I presume that Robert Patrick didn't record with the other guys.
Right.
Because he's Robert Patrick.
Right. Yeah, that's fair.
The heels of Terminator 2. So.
He was kicking ass and taking names and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't. What's your overall takeaway of the voice acting? Was it an asset to the game?
Yeah, I mean, I remember at the time, after playing the game and really liking it, I wanted to watch Terminator 2 to hear how Robert Patrick sounded. And so, remember, this was the 90s, so I had to wait for it to be broadcasted on TV. So I waited for a long time for Terminator 2 to be broadcasted on TV for me to compare the voices of Boston Lowe and the T-1000. But Robert Patrick has a really great voice. And
he does. I didn't see it till it arrived on TV either. And it's funny. It's not till I was older and I started renting the movies at the store that I'm like, for one, I haven't seen like 15% of these movies because they edit them. And for 2, I didn't know all these swear words are in here. I didn't see any of the nudity. Like they took them and they PG'd them down to put on network television. So I saw like a weirdly truncated version of all my favorite movies. So it was like rediscovering them all when I got older.
Well, luckily we didn't have that problem over here. We saw the actual versions of the movies. So regarding, you asked me about interesting fun facts and trivia in the game. So first of all, there are tons of Easter eggs. You can, when you look at the Pen Ultimate, which is the iPad they use, then Boston Lowe says that it's the T-1000 model, which is his character from Terminator. And you can also, if you click the Control B, then he flexes his muscles. And there are tons of stuff. And even in Curse of Monkey Island, there's an Easter egg in which when you're in Stan's room in the cemetery, then you can activate an Easter egg if you enter the room like 40 times or 45 times. Then Maggie and the spider appear in a spider web on the top left corner of the room.
Awesome.
That was an interesting
that's cool
Easter egg.
I like that. There's a few that I haven't tried that I've seen online where you can press Control B if you, is that where Boston flexes? Is that the Easter egg you're talking about? Because that's the one I didn't try.
The Easter egg is when you click Control B, so it doesn't happen naturally in the game. One thing I wanted to ask you, Paul, is how your kid reacted to Brink's amputation.
Very good question. I think I was really baiting him to figure that puzzle out inventory wise because I was excited. I actually remembered the solution, so I was really
Dad of the year.
yeah. Really.
Yeah.
Now, son, he said human teeth aren't strong enough. Human teeth. So yeah, I was going pretty heavy on trying to get him to figure it out. I might have kind of spoiled the moment for him in doing that. But he was disappointingly stoic, I guess you'd say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's just had to happen. He explained it. I mean, there is no other way. Are you in or are you out? So
The interesting part was that the dig wasn't was released in Israel. I don't remember seeing it in the computer store. So my father bought me this game when he visited the US back in 1996. I remember asking him to buy the dig. So
cool.
First of all, this is one of the two LucasArts adventure games that I got from the US. The second one is Rebel Assault 2. And so these are the only LucasArts games that came bundled with the Adventurer, because games that were released over here weren't released with the Adventurer. They had localized the game itself wasn't localized, but they had localized instructions and the localized box and didn't get the Adventurer. So the interesting part was the rating, because it has the rating in the back and says kids 6+, animated violence. But then while I was watching Brink being amputated at the time, I realized if that rating was adequate for this game.
Right.
I mean, you watch Brink die in the first 30 minutes of the game, then you watch him get amputated, and then you watch him die again.
Right.
yeah.
Which is considered kid-friendly in our part of town.
Wow. I've never seen a rating of ages 6 and up other than with a toy either. That's pretty awesome.
It does make you wonder where the line is between 5 and 6 years old at that point.
Is it the difference between... I've seen some things.
Yeah.
Oh man. No, that's good. You know what? I had a lot of fun playing this game. I did not have a clue what I was getting back into. All I've heard is the rhetoric that people have been throwing around on the internet about it for the last 20 or 30 years. And boy, does it not ever in any way pertain to how I feel about it, which is true. I mean, I've never really followed what reviewers are saying about specific games and who likes things and who doesn't like things. This game was beautiful. I thought the voice acting was great. The ambiance was great. It was a little puzzly for me, but look, we've got the internet. There's no reason to not play this game ever for any reason. It's a beautiful game. It's a short game, even not having to look up very much. It's under 4 hours, 5 hours, like very tops if you're doing a lot of exploring. So it's definitely within reach for anybody to play.
I haven't played it since, I think, played it in the pandemic once. Played it in 2020, so I haven't played it in 4 years. And the reason why I'm waiting to play it, I started playing it with Paul on stream, but he got bored halfway through.
Oh.
So
No.
yeah. And since then, this whole relationship was on the rocks. And basically, so the thing I'm waiting for is for some, now that I've got the Text Play series in which I bring back the people I've interviewed to have a let's play of one of their games with them on stream, is I presume that one of the people who worked on the dig would want to play the dig with me. But no one does. They all hate the game. Each and every one of them. All of the people I've interviewed hate the dig.
Well, hang on. Bill didn't say he absolutely hated the game. When you were interviewing him, he was
Michael Land was the first person who actually liked working on the soundtrack, because they actually let him do whatever he wanted. And so he also mentioned that the dig, the soundtrack, is the closest thing to his personal musical style out of all of the things he composed, he scored over the years. And he got to use samples of Wagner in the composition process, so he got to do whatever he wanted. But all the other people just hated it. The fact that, They felt like it was built out of various patches from different people, from different iterations of the game, with no coherent plan in sight.
Well,
And they also felt that the only reason why this project is not being canceled was the fact that it's got the Steven Spielberg name attached to it. So they knew it would be a great selling point.
right.
And so they didn't like working on a game that everyone thought should be canceled, but wasn't, because management thought that it would look great on the shelf that Steven Spielberg presents The Dig.
Right.
Even though I think he was only marginally involved in the beginning in the planning, wasn't he? I mean, I don't think he even stopped by throughout the whole process to inspect everything along the way.
Well, Steven Spielberg was more of a gamer than George Lucas was, so he actually played the game, and he wasn't involved in the entire production because it went on for 6 years. But he was in the initial meetings about the game, and it still has his original idea in it.
Right.
But
I like that.
so, and since it's his original idea, then they can use his name with his approval. So.
Right. So that's interesting, because I had heard like almost whispers, you could say, of like internal resentment towards the game, and it sounds like you're confirming that, Daniel, from your interviews. And is it true that I think I had heard like 4 minutes into the initial meeting of the game, like the initial sit down, there was a large earthquake?
Yeah, the San Francisco earthquake of '89.
The big one.
But yeah, it's interesting. Almost cast like an ominous.
It was an omen.
Right.
It was.
An omen, yes.
Not the kind of earthquake that opens up plates and allows you the access to the
Yeah.
inside of the planet either.
Right.
Yeah, it was the kind that tells you to cancel the game before you start working on it.
Yeah, exactly. It's a big sign. But
So-
I'm glad they finished it off anyways.
And real quick on the Michael Land Wagner thing, that's interesting. He basically was saying that he took influence from Wagner's works when he made this soundtrack.
Not just influence from Wagner's work. They got at that point they got licensing for a bunch of CDs and various musical leitmotifs and basically. They got licensing for samples of various CDs, and including Wagner's works. So, in addition to the digital instrumentation that Michael Land added to the game, he used samples from Wagner to give the entire soundtrack a more live orchestra feel, even though it wasn't.
Right. Okay.
Right, because there was cello and woodwinds. I mean, it really went orchestral at some points in the soundtrack for sure.
Yeah, it's nice. It's nice hearing Daniel immediately pronounce his name right. Nothing makes me feel more pretentious than when I hear somebody say Wagner. It's just like I don't know. It makes me shudder. I don't know why it bothers me.
Just like you guys pronounce Ludger, even though it's Ludger.
Oh, is it Ludger? Oh, okay. I should
Yeah,
know
it is
that. That's
Ludger.
terrible. I will preemptively not have Paul edit any of my mistakes out so that people can come to the realization with me at this exact moment.
There's the payoff.
It's got to be somewhere.
All right.
But yeah, I think that I was reading about it, and the whole soundtrack of the score was made on a Kurzweil K2000 synthesizer. Now I have a Kurzweil downstairs. I had gotten it after, I think it was a Core T1 that we traded it in for, but it is an amazing piece of machinery. I mean, everything about this, even though now it's like almost 30 years old, is like the future when you're playing on one of those. The guy was a genius.
So can you
Kurzweil.
recreate the soundtrack for The Dig using the Kurzweil K2000?
I guess I could walk downstairs and start trying. No, my
And you
mom
should
wants
use
to
it
sell
as the intro theme for this podcast.
Oh, cool.
Play whatever you
Yeah.
want, and then record that, and that would be the
That's a
musical
good
cue at the
idea.
beginning of the podcast.
The listeners,
Paul,
be
you're
like,
going to have to stop by and do that.
the listeners be like, "Oh, Paul had his kid do the intro this week. That's adorable."
Aw, that's adorable. That's so cute. We should do that. Actually, your kid should do the intro one week. That would be pretty awesome.
Oh man! All right, let's wrap this thing up. Daniel, let's do your plugs real quick. I mean, we kind of have you covered even when you're not here, but tell everybody about your new Tech Talk channel.
Okay, so now we started a spin-off channel from Conversations with Curtis that includes only my conversations with the people behind the games that I played as a kid. So it's Tech Talk with Daniel Albu on YouTube, which is youtube.com/@DanielAlbu. And over there, you can watch all of my interviews from December 31st, which the first one was Aloe, and everything after that.
Very cool. And what about upcoming stuff?
And on Twitter, I'm Daniel Albu, and on Mastodon, I'm Daniel Albu at Game Dev Mastodon Place, and on Blue Sky, I'm Daniel Albu, and on Twitch, I'm Tech Talk with Daniel Albu, because I joined the Twitch game too late, and so some other weird-ass Daniel Albu took my username.
That's terrible. I'm sorry to hear
the
that.
Daniel Albus around the world are pretty annoying, because they always use my email.
Oh, no.
And so they register to a bunch of things. And what else? YouTube, Twitter.
I love the rivalry between you and the other Daniel Albus. That's fun to think about.
Yeah. My arch nemesis, Daniel Albu.
Yeah.
And I mean, you can also find Daniel on the AGHN Content Creators podcast. He's been there. Yeah. I think there's about 5 episodes out so far. And it's all of, I mean, Paul and I are even there for a couple of them. And we talk about like a lot of the really in-depth behind the scenes, behind content creating, behind the interviews, some of the challenges. And it's a really cool place. If you like hearing the three of us banter together, there's another place you can find more.
Mm-hmm. And of course, I'm still the co-producer and co-host of Conversations with Curtis. All of my live streams will still be there. So all of the episodes of Text Play, in which I play the games with the people I've interviewed. So I've got Noah Falstein. I'm going to play Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis with him. Oh, cool. I get the Space Quest 6 developers. I'm going to play Space Quest 6 with them in a couple of days.
Oh, that's great.
And nice. I'm going to play Fatty Bear's Surprise Party.
I love that game.
From Humongous Entertainment with Brett Taylor, who was the developer of the Scum engine on that game.
Cool.
That's amazing.
And so
I really like that game. That's my kid's favorite Humongous game. Mm-hmm. Very cool. And listeners, we'll link all of Daniel's stuff below. Again, as we usually do, we'll throw some extras in this week, though, like the Twitch and all that stuff. And yeah. Mm-hmm. Check out. And do you want to do our just extremely painful outro real quick?
Oh my God. Yeah. If you really feel the need to follow us, and we're only saying this because apparently you feel the need to find us around out there outside of listening to our voices, but you can find us on Twitter at CGG Podcast. You can also find Paul on Twitter at The Phantom Fellows. You can also download The Phantom Fellows demo on Steam or wishlist it, have a check it out, see what's up there. Send us your words, mail at classicgamersguild.com, or even become a Patreon to support the show. So yeah, thanks to all of our Patreon people. We really appreciate you. It makes the show possible. And an extra special thanks to Tim Ellis in our extra special thanks tier that we haven't renamed yet, as well as Girolamo, you, Castaldo, you are awesome, however you pronounce your name, and we really appreciate you in the extra special thanks to Michael Council, Brian Manown, and our very newest Patreoner, Marina Turner. I am not a name person. Don't make me do this again.
Very professional.
Yeah.
Why, thank you. I was trying. That was trying, guys. That actually was. No, it was very trying for the listeners. Anyways.
I preempted this as being painful, and we're just delivering on a promise.
It's true. So we're on Facebook. We're a page. We're a group, Classic Gamers Guild. We're also on Instagram. We're also on YouTube. So you can shout us out into the void. We're there. We're on your Google speakers. Just ask for the Classic Gamers Guild podcast. It's fine. If you boo at it, we won't hear it. Paul, please save me.
Oh, God. Is there anything else to do? Don't do murder.
Thank God.
Ooh, shoot, we're out of there. That was close.
Can we curse?
This is the time.
Balls ass. Okay, sorry.